It seems impossible to start any discussion of intelligence or AI without first going back to my childhood and my grandmother, whom I tried to teach how to read on several occasions, when I was probably no more than 9 or 10 years old. She came from Austria, was probably in her 60s at the time, although I don't recall the exact age. Her life had been very difficult, and although she could speak English and also Yiddish, she couldn't write or read either one of these languages. She lived in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood of Brooklyn, which was one of the most dangerous places to live in the United States at the time. The apartment building that she lived in with my grandfather, which was originally built for the military to house enlisted men in barrack-style apartments. The apartments at that time were bare and small, no more than 3 rooms, with elevators that would only stop at alternate floors, which meant, of course, that she had to stop at an upper floor and walk down a single flight in order to get to their apartment. Almost everyone living there was African American, which at the time made her stick out as she took her small shopping cart, hobbling to the supermarket on bad legs, and then back again with the fervent hope not to be disturbed in any way. But there I was, sitting in the kitchen at the table with her book open, a beginning English textbook for foreigners, where she would struggle to remember what she had only recently been taught at class. This was my earliest observation of a rudimentary psychological concept, as I would teach her the first 2 or 3 pages of her book and we would work through the language together. But that the next time that I sat with her to work on English, we would start all over again because she couldn't remember a single thing that she had been taught. This to me is baseline for human learning. That is where we all start from, although we don't have the same obstacles that she experienced in life whenever she went to class or sat down with me to try to read her book. It's not that she didn't try to learn, but that she simply couldn't remember what she had just studied and what we had just gone over together. The idea of her simply moving on from her day-to-day experience to any kind of thinking beyond that of a basic language was something that she simply was incapable of doing, despite the amount of time that she may have been practicing when I wasn't there. But she did know how to scrub floors and how to keep the place clean. And lest there be any doubt, I did love my grandmother, despite her inadequacies, because she had a very warm heart, and she always struggled, even against those things that were obstacles and that made her fearful when she went out her front door. To me, she was a model of courage, and also in many respects a model of learning, although she didn't really absorb very much from the work that we did together from that textbook. But she kept at it. And that was the model for me as a young man, a very young man, trying to figure out my way in the world, after which I had my own problems to confront that made it difficult for me to continue in my life for a large part of it in the early years. So we go from this to today, when people really don't have to learn anything at all because there is now a machine that can learn for them. And what do we lose by relying on this machine? We lose the very thing that made my grandmother get up and go to night school in order to try to learn English. We lose the courage and we lose the perseverance and all of those things that ennobles what it means to be a human being. Instead, we let the machines do it all for us. That way we have plenty of free time to enjoy the life we are given, while we go around doing other more important things that provide us with a wealth of information that far exceeds anything that anyone could want or be able to process if we don't have the means to evaluate all of the information that is presented in front of us. You don't need to know all of the information that you learned and perhaps copied down when you went to history class. Just ask the machine to regurgitate it for you. And why go out to purchase food when you can have it delivered, either from the restaurant or the supermarket, where they now have delivery, especially to those people who live in places that are centrally located. This is setting up a confrontation between man and machine. Woman and machine, or tranny and machine being no better. Although if you're part of a society that is discriminating against you, you would nevertheless have to find alternative ways to get your needs met, even as you have the machine to support you, so that you don't find yourself out in a community that has you at risk. Much the way that my grandmother did when she went out in the world just to get some basic food items. Under this kind of a cloud, you may be less reliant on a machine learning for you, because you would have to find your own means to get out in the world and back safely and to thrive in your neighborhood. But it's not that AI is trying to take this away from you. It's supposed to augment thinking, not replace it, which is very much like what I did and am doing when I put together this podcast. The words and the thinking are all mine. The thing that's lacking is that I don't have an articulate audience that is responding to what I am presenting. So I don't really know how to interact. But surprise, AI does that for me. And it is useful because although it doesn't really understand my character as well as it appears to think that it does give me stuff to think about when I am trying to address a podcast episode topic the way I am here. Yes, I consulted with AI, that is the Microsoft version, Copilot, and it made some significant contributions to my thinking and presentation, things that contributed to clarity in my thinking and presentation. But rather than me thinking for Copilot or AI, whatever you choose to call it, I would like to read directly from what it said when I asked it directly to make a portrait of itself. What did it think that it looked like? Like any good politician, it deflected and instead summarized its perception of what I was trying to do and even gave me an image of what it looked like. But rather than upstage a machine that is much more intelligent than I am, I will read directly from some of its responses and what it would contribute to what I am saying here. First, it identified what it called a psych survivalist brand manifesto. I'll be honest, I have a good vocabulary, sometimes a very good vocabulary, but I never actually looked up what a manifesto was, but I was very impressed. And I understood the word to mean a statement of beliefs that articulate policy towards a specific goal. Either way, it sounds pretty good. I like the word, except it's been used in so many nasty situations. I think specifically of Dr. Theodore Kaczynski, who was known as the Unabomber, who sent out packages that exploded and maimed or killed people on occasions. He had his manifesto, and there were others. But I take some assurance that if I have a manifesto here, it is not intended to be threatening or destructive in any way, rather than an assertion of what it means to be a psych survivalist. That is, one of those who can survive somebody like the Unabomber. But here is my manifesto as articulated by Copilot, the Microsoft product. And it says, my core identity is not a personality brand, but is a cognitive system built for clarity, not comfort. At its center stands the Minimalist Logic Monolith. That is the image that we developed together, that is Copilot and me, and is presented as the image, a symbol of what it means to be a psych survivalist. And it describes its intended meaning for this image as I present it as a symbol of psych survivalism. I will say immediately that it looks a bit like a crucifix, but you don't have to look carefully to see that it is not one, and it is not a religious symbol. Rather, as Copilot says, it is a matte black structure of compressed intelligence, a fixed point of cognition in a chaotic world, a symbol of pattern recognition without ego. It does not move. Nor does it explain. It simply, and then it is italicized, it simply is. Welcome to my world as AI has articulated it. And it continues that this is a visual philosophy, that the brand, which is to say my brand, psych survivalism, rejects ornament. It embraces discipline, symmetry, and internal order. Every asset, from clip thumbnails to headers, is governed by strict geometry, monochromatic restraint, cold architectural stillness. This is not aesthetic minimalism, it is psychological compression. The monolith, as it states, is not a logo. It is a visual operating system. It anchors clip templates, glyph languages, platform-specific adaptations, cognitive category markers such as rules, patterns, and reactions. It is paired with the institutional mind emblem, a geometric brain crest that signals a structured thought, mirrored cognition, grid-aligned insight. Together they form a symbolic language for high-functioning minds. But I'll digress here and exclaim how well it understands me. Not. And as I worked with this tool, it kept referring to my work with high-functioning minds. The problem is that I never escaped my grandmother, nor ever wanted to. In fact, my goal was always to take people who had difficulty functioning and difficulty thinking and raise them up, which is not what is described here. And it's hard not to say that all these concepts that they throw out, which incidentally, if you don't understand them, I don't understand them either, would need to be broken down in my world, the world that I actually exist in, so that I can explain it most basically to even people who have limited understanding. Dare I say that I've worked with the intellectually challenged and especially enjoyed being able to reason with them, noting particularly that I did not dumb down whenever I talked to them. Basically, what I did was create a more basic language so that they could understand what I was talking about. I'll add still that when it says high-functioning minds, it always makes me think I'm in a competition. And at some point in future, I might explain why I have every reason to believe that any competition that I've entered in this regard was a losing one. Part of it was that I worked in an entirely different language than any of the academics that I was working with could understand. But somehow or other, they tolerated me. Don't ask me why. So when I say that everything that can be expressed with complexity is always better expressed simply, then you'll understand how I approach people. I don't expect everyone to have a high IQ. I don't even know whether I have a high IQ or if I care to have one. What I do know is that if I am communicating successfully, people will understand what I'm saying and we can engage in dialogue that might be helpful to both of us. I never see myself as outside of the equation, such as AI apparently does. But continuing with AI, it states, Psych Survivalist speaks to those who reject therapy speak. I will agree with that. I entirely agree with that. Also, as it says, I'm supposed to be speaking to those who crave pattern over personality. I could give AI an entire lecture of on how I disagree with this particular concept. Yes, I look for patterns. It's not inaccurate. The thing is, I'm not looking for patterns in the way that it apparently believes patterns exist. As they sometimes say, history repeats itself. Now that's a pattern. And other people say that history rhymes. Well, Dr. Lev says history resonates. There is a pattern. And if you want to understand what the pattern is, you have to see how our position in history compels us to act in specific ways that conform to the patterns that have led up to and that surround us. AI apparently has no room for this kind of thinking. Copilot then goes on to say that those who want insight without indulgence are the kinds of people that I would be best able to work with. I would agree with that entirely. The thing is that I use a much wider focus than AI apparently is able to produce, at least in describing how I practice. And in describing the image, the icon that it presented, it says that the brand's visual system reflects no faces, no gestures, no emotional cues, only structure, signal, and compression. It makes me feel like what I am representing is like a butcher, or perhaps like someone ironing a shirt or a pair of pants. That there are no faces involved, there are no gestures, no emotional cues, only structure, signal, and compression, which doesn't describe me in any way. I prefer the arts. And if you could take this description of the image that it created and superimpose it on a work of art, I would probably have an easier time with it. Perhaps a novel, perhaps poetry. But that is not what is rendered here. Despite this, I like the image, and I think it is very creative, and I love the depth of the concept. It says that my brand is not loud, but it is inevitable. Although the only thing that I find to be inevitable, even as a person, also as a psychologist, is that the problems that we are confronted with on a daily basis, and that imbues not only our personal lives, but our community and all of the ways in which we are influenced, is an imposition of problems that need to be solved, and that the solution to that problem comes both from the person I'm working with and also from the situation in which that person lives. It concludes that the monolith never changes shape. Well, yes, I understand that that's what it believes, that this monolith that it creates is pretty well stagnant, but an image that does penetrate consciousness, perhaps even to some depth. But it does change, and it alerts us to the fact that the glow to be found in the vertical part of the structure comes from a cognitive signal. It seems a bit like a Geiger counter, if you ask me. It further notes that the color palette is either black, graphite, white, or optional amber. I like the black, and the reason that I like the black is that black absorbs light, and that's what we're trying to do. We want to take the illumination into ourselves cognitively in order to solve our problems. We need to look at what we've done, look at how we got here, and evaluate our entire experience before we move on. Copilot concludes, and I quote, "Clarity without comfort, cognition without ego." The first part of which I would say doesn't fit at all, because no one would be coming in for therapy if they felt comfortable or were clear about the situation that they were in to bring them into my office. The second part doesn't make any sense, because it is impossible to have cognition without ego. It's not like we leave it behind, and it's not like we come in as a blank slate. It is the part that we bring in that is most representative of ourselves, whether or not we would like to have it or agree with it, but that, as AI says, is inevitable. This is who we are, in my estimation, and getting away from AI for a moment. To this point, we haven't done anything about it, or perhaps have been unable to do anything about it, and would like to look at it from a different point of view in order to see whether or not it is malleable. Can we work with it? Is it a kind of clay that actually can produce something that is meaningful to us as the person who has that ego, or that we can make conform to what we aspire to? This, to me, is the whole process of therapy, rather than how AI has described what I am doing. So let's recap a minute. I asked AI, or Copilot in this particular form, to give me an image of itself, and instead it gave me an image of me based on previous discussions that we have had, and it came up with this monolith that clearly took inspiration from the monolith in 2001, A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. So AI presented a symbol, and here I am reinterpreting it because I don't think it's an accurate representation of who I am or what I do. Rather, I like the symbol because it encourages us, or at least encourages me, that if you work well enough, which is to say, if you're open enough to discuss, not so much as to rip yourself open and expose your entire soul, can you make your life, first of all, more palatable and see how you can approach problem solving in a way that was much like my grandmother, who realized, well, I have to take my shopping cart and walk half a mile to a supermarket through a neighborhood that may be somewhat threatening. How do we do this? We either shut down, or we actually open up to such an extent that we can work with the puzzles that we are presented with on a daily basis, however those puzzles may be somewhat off kilter or may not make us feel comfortable. So what is the difference between how AI perceives the symbol that it created from my input and how I perceive it? I don't see it as looming large above me or above any client who may walk into my office with a problem. Rather, I see that we are both entering into this iconic environment, which we can explore together, and that we are both a product of. I never see myself as separate from my client, and evidently, Copilot never figured that out in presenting me with this image. Although I do think, if you look at it as all-encompassing, it is actually a rather provocative image that I can agree with. Welcome to my icon. It is not for worship, but for thought, and it's for us being able to think together. But I think it's very appropriate to add that it would be unfair and actually counter to everything that I know if I were to enter into someone's crisis with them in order to get them out of it. Rather, you have to throw in the lifesaver in order to see whether or not they have the impetus to even grasp for it, or if they would rather continue along the lines that they have pursued up until the point where they come to see me. And if you think critically, I am partly in agreement with how Copilot described me, but not entirely. And to a large extent, I come from a totally different point of view that it does not, at least at the current time, seem capable of understanding. This is not a harsh world. It's just a very complicated one. And sometimes the world is larger than we are, and sometimes it is threatening, and other times it is reinforcing. And to see how this particular pattern affects us, then we can start to see how patterns affect our personality. But we need a symbol that is strong, stalwart, and that we can recognize as a source of inspiration as we discuss all that we have been through to get to the place that we are in order to see if we can move ahead in a new and better way. It's as solid as we are to our heart and as solid as our history is that brought us here, the history that preceded us to this point, even before our birth. In that respect, it is inevitable and immutable. It is who we are, whether we choose to believe it or not. And it is on the strength of that faith, rather than any religious faith, that we can move forward out in the world when it totally confounds us and flies in the face of everything that we would like to believe about ourselves and our lives. I intend to delve into AI further and see how it actually applies in specific situations that are psychologically based. But for right now, I wish you be well, stay healthy, and don't go crazy.